Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark Stay.
And I'm Mark DeLong. We'd like to firstly thank all of our incredible patrons and academates who are making this podcast possible. The 5 years we've been going now. And if you're interested in joining the Academy, the Bestseller Academy is open now for new applicants, and you can get in for 2022. And talking of 5 years, Mark, it was 5 years ago, almost to the day, that we last had Mr. Michael Connelly on this podcast.
Yes, it popped up on my Facebook memories as a treasured memory, so I'm very happy about that. But yes, a very, very special guest. Where do we start? I mean, Michael Connelly is the best-selling author of 36 novels, one work of non-fiction, over 80 million copies of his books sold worldwide, translated into 45 languages, one of the most successful writers working today, won countless awards, including the CWA's Diamond Dagger. His book Bloodwork was directed by Clint Eastwood. Matthew McConaughey was Mickey Haller in The Lincoln Lawyer. He's been number one so many times we actually lost count. He's also executive producer of Bosch and Amazon Studios' original drama series based on his best-selling character Harry Bosch, starring Titus Welliver. Bosch streams on Amazon Prime Video, and he's also the creator and host of the podcast Murder Book. He's also a gentleman who is very generous with his time and advice for new writers, as we discovered when we first had him on the podcast 5 years ago. But some incredible things have happened since, not least his latest novel, The Dark Hours. Ladies and gentlemen, folks, please be upstanding for Mr. Michael Connelly. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me back.
Oh,
I thought you'd want me back sooner than 5 years, but I'll take the 5 years.
And Michael, the last time you were on the show, you may remember this. I think you'd just done a book signing, and you're in London, and a certain Mr. Stay managed to somehow wangle a ride with you in your cab for 15 minutes between. What I want to know is, did he actually end up paying the fare for you in the end, or did he just disappear out?
Yeah, I think he jumped out while I was still moving.
Yeah, rolled out onto the pavement. You've got a fantastic new book out, The Dark Hours, which is a Ballard and Bosch novel. You've got two of your great characters working together. You've got a killer striking on New Year's Eve, which I love because you've got this built-in ticking clock. What I love about this, as with all your previous books, you write them as a chronicle of our times. There's references to the pandemic, social unrest, low morale, and the LAPD. I know the LA riots have loomed over all the Harry Bosch books. So what were the big challenges with this story? Particularly, you're looking at the role of the police these days. We've got Black Lives Matter and issues such as that. How much of that is boiling in your mind as you're creating a novel like this?
Well, it's there a lot. But I guess the challenge is to not let that overpower the story, because, at the end of the day, it's about this character, Renee Ballard, and to a second degree, Harry Bosch, but it's a Ballard narration. And so you're riding with her through these stories and all those things that you mentioned, which in my opinion add up to the title, The Dark Hours. It's the dark hours of American policing, if you ask me. You want to have that in there because that's what's happening, and I've done that all along. So why change after 35 novels that are reflecting what's happening in the real world in the year they're published? I wasn't going to change that. So first of all, I had to include this to some degree. And then it was just about turning it into an advantage, making these things, unfortunately, which in real life, they are obstacles to good police work, the low morale, basically, most of the police force mailing it in. And then you have a character like Ballard, who's, her hallmark is being relentless when she's on a case. And so this is just one more obstacle that she has to get through. And so that in a way, I turn it to my advantage because it lets me show what kind of character she is, that she's not being pulled into this quicksand, into this malaise, that she's still fighting the good fight. And, so if you can use a real thing that's going on in society as an obstacle and you show how she gets through it, I think you're connecting it to the reader, because most of the people who read this book have not solved murders or caught rapists. but they can connect on that level of fighting the good fight to get through every day in what has been, at least in the last year or so, some dark times.
A lot of writers often are very kind of worried about time stamping their books in terms of events that are happening. What advice would you have for them, Michael? Because obviously, just looking at the beginning of Dark Hours, there's lots of references to COVID and wearing masks and the like, and that really connected for me. How important is it for you to kind of use your books as almost like historical time points as well in terms of what's happening in the world?
Well, I mean, every writer has to make that call. And there's writers that are doing fabulous work where their characters never age and you can't really tell what time it is, time of year, that kind of thing. And that's fine. It's kind of like, what's that saying? Whatever floats your boat. Do what you want to do. I came to this from 14 years in journalism, and, I'm a journalist at heart, I think. And so I use that. I report on what's going on in, maybe it's a small ball thing like the police department, but maybe it's a bigger thing like society, beyond the stretches of Los Angeles. That floats my boat to spend a year reflecting on what's going on right outside my window or right on the other side of the TV, the news screen. And that keeps me plugged in as a writer. I'm not saying everybody has to do that. And you also have to think, that was very nice of you to say that connected you to my books right away. But some people are reading right now. Reading is up. Book sales are up, around the world because of COVID. It's a pandemic. More people are at home and more people are deciding to get back into reading. But maybe they're trying to get away from COVID. And then they get into my book. And on the second page, some guy's pounding on her door, her window of her car, and he's not wearing a mask. And they won't roll the window down. So it's very clear in this book, we're in the real world. And, my top advice is just keep your head down and write the story you want to write. But you might want to step back and say, do people want to read that? I didn't do that step back. I just decided to do what I always do, and that's reflect what's going on in the world in the year the book's published.
You used a word to describe Ballard there, relentless, which is a word that came up in our previous interview. And it's one of the greatest pieces of advice that you've given to writers, one we've repeated over and over again, which is to be relentless, to never give up. And it, as Mr. D will tell you, it inspired us to do something very special.
Yeah, back in the original interview we did, Michael, with you, we talked about your writing habits, and you talked about how you when you're working on something, you're writing every day, even if it was 15 minutes. And we launched, actually, we kept hearing this from many, many successful authors, and we launched a writing challenge called the 200 word a day writing challenge. And the idea is that just 15 minutes a day, do 200 words. And it's inspired over 20 million words written over the last year. So, so just to show you like some of the little things, some of the little bits of advice you dropped into the last interview have inspired so many writers to write, and people are absolutely. So firstly, massive thank you for that advice. Is that something that is something you still do when you're working on a project? Is this write everyday mentality, this relentlessness, is it still part of your work?
Yeah, it is. And because I'm involved in some TV shows based on my books, sometimes it's hard to get the 15 minutes, but I stick to that rule. And I can't remember exactly what I said on that show 5 years ago, but that was advice passed to me from a teacher when I was at the university, and it's really served me well. And I probably said this on the show. It's because it keeps the story going in your head. It's not really about the 15 minutes at your keyboard. It's about what went into your thinking and your creative processes before you got to the 15 minutes. And so I think it's, it was passed on to me, and I pass on to you. I've talked about it a lot. And it's funny because, as Mark said, the people connect to relentlessness. We want to be relentless and fierce in whatever we're doing. And so I write about these detectives. I think those two words describe Bosch and Ballard pretty well. But, and I think people can connect on that level because we want to be, whatever you do, whether you're a writer or something else, you want to be relentless at it. And so I think that's a good connecting point for me to have said 5 years ago. I'm surprised I said something that seemed smart.
Does that relentlessness come from your journalism background? Because it's very easy to be fobbed off as a journalist, no comment, whatever. You have to keep knocking on doors, picking up phones, pursuing a lead. Is that where that comes from?
Yeah, and I was fortunate. I got out of the business before it really kind of downsized because of basically news consumption moving to the internet. So when I was in the business, it was pretty fat and happy and profitable. And I worked in cities where there were competitive other newspapers. So I did it for 14 years and it was competitive that whole time. And so that does keep you moving, and it does keep you knocking on doors or making the extra call, trying to get something that, the other guy across the street and the other newspaper didn't get. And so, yeah, there's I think that is where I got a lot of my work ethic and possibly the idea of going at this in a relentless manner, because if you're writing a book, some people are fast writers. I think I am. But, even if it takes a year, there's something built in that's leisurely about that. Like, if you have a bad day, you can say, well, I got, 300 more days before my deadline. You need something else that powers you through. And maybe it's the story. Maybe it's the character that you just can't wait every morning to write about that. But you got to find a means of turning on that DNA, that relentless DNA.
On that note, Michael, maybe using the dark hours as an example, so many books now into your career, what do you most love and enjoy about the process now of writing?
Well, I love the exploration of character, especially because I come back to characters. And so every time it's like the question or the challenge is what's new this time? Because a character, if you're doing series stuff, the character can't be static book to book. Something new has to come out. So that's the main thing. But I often look for things that just intrigue me or I find that are neat about like this city, Los Angeles or something like that. In the dark hours, there's a whole strand of investigation involving streetlights. And it's all based on real stuff. And that was a reporter in me. I went and looked into this because in Los Angeles, there's no uniformity in streetlights. You can go 2 blocks and the streetlights look different. And so I started exploring that and found a way of connecting it to a clue path for Ballard. And so, it's not a big thing in the book, but when I'm already past that book. I finished writing it almost a year ago, and I'm on to the next one. So when I look back, and I have a real good, which I think serves me, amnesia when it comes to when I move on to the next book. I'm in that tunnel. I'm in that, and that's all I'm thinking about. And so it's weird because I'll be well into a book, and then the previous book is published, and I'm doing things like the bestseller experiment and so forth. And I have to remember that book I wrote, and I've kind of blanked it out. And so when I look back on this book, I've been doing a few interviews in the last week. That keeps coming up, how much fun that was to research and to go into neighborhoods, take photos, go to the Bureau of Street Lighting in Los Angeles, things like that. So usually there's a plot element that really plugs me in. But the priority or the main element is what am I going to do with the character this time that's different?
Talking of tunnels, Michael, what point does the LA cop dramas become called gridlocked and they can't catch any criminals because they're just sitting in traffic all day long? Is it pretty bad right now?
Well, it was amazing. This place was amazing in the middle of a pandemic when you could go anywhere in like 10 minutes. And now it's pretty much back to usual. But it's funny. I always say Los Angeles is a very tough place to visit, but it's better if you live here. You appreciate it more. And one of the things you learn is how to get around. And so that you're not sitting on a freeway that's not moving. Not everyone can do that, and not everybody has that facility. And I have a job that's lucky where I don't have a routine. Like I have to drive somewhere at 9 every day or something. but you make do with what you got, and I really love the city, and I'm lucky that in my job where I work from home, I'm going out to do research or meetings or whatever I'm doing. I can kind of control my world in terms of traffic where others can't.
Dark Hours is another crossover with Ballard and Bosch, and I know Mickey Haller's interacted with these characters too. You've created a Michael Connelly universe, long before the Marvel Cinematic Universe made it fashionable. Did that come organically, or was it something you planned, or was there a point where you thought, I should do this and make this bigger?
Definitely was no plan. I wrote the first Harry Bosch book, not even knowing if it would be published. So I wasn't thinking like 30 years later, I hope I'm writing about this guy, because I'm coming up on 30 years, and January is 30 years since the first Bosch book. And so you can't have that kind of foresight. But the one thing I did was name him Harry Bosch, really Hieronymus Bosch. I named him after a painter that did works of art that had all kinds of stuff going on in all corners of the paintings. And and the signature work is called The Garden of Earthly Delights. And that was really why I named him Bosch, because of that painting. And I viewed Los Angeles as kind of the modern day Garden of Earthly Delights, with all of its temptations and all of its failings and fallings. And so that, at some point, back basically 4 books in, I quit being a journalist because I had signed a contract that I knew I could go about 3 or 4 years just writing books, and I either make it or break it in those 4 years. And so that was when I started thinking about an overall mosaic where all these stories would be interconnected. The Bosch books don't stand separately from the Lincoln Lawyer books or the Jack McAvoy books. On some level, all my books are connected. Some very minor ways, but some in quite large ways with character crossovers and so forth. So it was about 4 or 5 books in where I thought, well, if I can keep doing this, this is what I should do. Show a city that's evolving. The characters might be different, but the city's always LA. And so it's really, I'm going to show this city evolving, write a book a year, set in the year it's published, and almost like an anthropological study of a city. And then these characters are attached to that portrait. And, I just got lucky, but, I think, like I keep bringing up this 30 years thing, I think it's a pretty good, pretty decent 30-year study of a city.
Yeah. How are you keeping track of that? Because you spoke of that amnesia, which I can relate to. If you try and think back to what you wrote 2 books ago, it's difficult. But when you're writing it, do you have some sort of database or reference you can go to say, oh, hang on, did this character actually do this thing back then? Or do you just rely on your memory for that?
I pretty much rely on memory, and then, there'll be enough people to let you know if you get something wrong on the internet. But no, I don't have any kind of master database. I kind of wish I did, but like I said, nothing is really planned, and so like to keep a database would be to indicate I knew this was going to go on for 30 years, and I just did not. But I've only had 2 copy editors over the 30 years. And the first one started kind of like the Bible, where she collected all these facts. And then the next one carried it on from there. So I'll turn in a book every time I turn in a book, and they'll say, well, actually in this book, you said this about this person, or this person had green eyes, not brown, that kind of thing. And so I'm lucky that I don't have to spend a whole lot of time worrying about that stuff, because someone will find out for me. And also I have a kind of an internet researcher who part of his job is to have all my books in digital format. And I can just tell him, do a keyword search through all my books for this thing and see what I've written about it before. And that works pretty well for me as well.
Wow. 30 years, Michael. Let's just stop and take a breath for a minute and reflect on that. That's pretty phenomenal. At what point during those 30 years would you say that things changed for you? Because I know for many authors listening to this, they dream of reaching the level that you have and the audience that you have. At what point in those 30 years, can you remember like a specific moment where you thought, this is actually really taking off? Like, readers are really engaging. This could be for real. Can you?
Well, I had some markers. I'm not an overnight success by any means, but my first 4 books had incremental growth. So I didn't have a downturn, and they were all Bosch books. And then I was able to, as I said, quit my day job as a journalist. And I knew I could go 3 or 4 years unless things continued to progress, and I could go even further. But so I decided, so I'm leaving the business of journalism. I'd write about a journalist. So my 5th book was called The Poet, and it was a straight out thriller. I know publishers have a hard time figuring out how to market a series fiction, because like it's the 4th Harry Bosch book. Jump on the train now. People are predisposed. I mean, you don't go see the 3rd Harry Potter movie first. You know what I mean? So they always have an issue with that. And that's what I sensed early on. And so when I gave them this thing that was unconnected at that point, later on in a sequel, I would connect it to the Harry Bosch books. But this stood by itself, and it was a pretty good, fast-moving thriller, I believe. And if you give that to the publishing machine, they know what to do with it. So that one really increased my profile tremendously. And so then I was suddenly on another plane. And so my pattern became write a Bosch book and then write something new. And so there was about a 4 or 5 book period there where I was alternating Bosch and something new. And that just kept pumping up my sales and my level and everything. And so it was probably, I mean, it wasn't real fast, but in 2006, so halfway through my current career, basically, I published The Lincoln Lawyer, and that book really did well. And that was I thought that was like, I'm going to be able to do this for the rest of my life. And so that was a very significant moment.
When you look back on the last 30 years, do you sometimes pinch yourself as to what's happened with your career? Does it feel real to you?
No, it feels very surreal because, again, you can't see any of this happening. I mean, I don't think a lot of people go into writing books thinking like, I'm going to be wealthy and they do it because they want to tell stories. And that's why I did it. I never foresaw anything like this. I always thought I'd have a day job. I always thought I'd be a reporter and this would be stuff I do on the side. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey. A couple of years ago on the Bosch TV show, we didn't adapt the books in order. We took what we needed, because the first season, we really wanted to have Bosch on an emotional journey. So we used the book that spoke to that more so. And so it was 4 or 5 seasons in before we got to adapting my first book, The Black Echo. And that book opens, before we meet Harry Bosch, we have a preface kind of where a kid named Sharky, nicknamed Sharky, happens to be a witness to a murder. And then we meet Bosch, and Bosch catches that murder, and he looks for Sharky as the witness. So that was the very first chapter, the very first book I wrote. And when I wrote it, I had no idea if I'd ever get published. So about 24 years later, they're filming that scene. And that was just an amazing night to think, and I just walked around by myself. I usually am very collegial with all the people working on the show, but I was on the outskirts just watching them film this because it really hit me like what a journey it's been, and an unexpected journey. Now here I am almost a quarter century after I wrote 5 pages I didn't think anyone other than my wife and mother might be the only ones to read. Now they're filming it all these years later. It was pretty strange. It's a pretty strange trip it's been.
Bosch on Prime was arguably, I think, the first really big streaming hit, made for streaming hit. I worked at Orion at the time, and I know I had to explain to some of them what streaming was. They were like, "Well, I have to watch it on a laptop." It's like, no, this is going to be great. It's now Prime's longest running series, and it's so cinematic. Each episode looks like a movie. It has this just fantastic quality to it. Could you have imagined what it's now become?
No, I mean, you can, my whole career is, I can't imagine. And this is just one section of it that also was beyond. But, I give myself credit because, as you said, no one knew what this was. I'm an insomniac. And so I happened to be an early adapter of streaming. And Amazon, before they made any shows, you could go on there and watch old movies all through the night and that kind of thing. And I love streaming. It's watching when you want to watch, what you want to watch. And so when they came around and offered to do it with Bosch, it was going to be their first 1 hour drama. They had one other show, a half-hour comedy. And so it was a risky thing. And so many people said, what are you doing? And but I knew, because it was in its infancy, that we were going to be let alone to do what we wanted to do. And that was the key to our success, I think. Amazon's quite different now. They got dozens and dozens of shows. They got dozens and dozens of people telling the showrunners what they want and all that. But back in those early days, Amazon Studios was 2 people. That was it. And one was always in meetings, and the other one was the guy we talked to. And he would just say, "Okay, sounds good," when we said what we were going to do. It's so different now, but we got in early, and by the time it changed, we were already kind of established, and you don't mess with something that's working. And so it was a lot of fun to be in those early stages of the streaming bonanza.
It's almost like you're an original gangster in the streaming world. Because Mark and I were talking before this interview about, like, let's just future cast 200 years into the future, and we're all long gone. Like, when they look back at the history of how streaming started, and Bosch is going to be right there. And the fact that Bosch was a great series obviously partly changed the course of streaming history. I mean, if both Netflix and Amazon had gone with really bad shows to begin with, maybe streaming would have never have happened. So it's kind of interesting to reflect on. And you ever thought about the kind of the bigger picture as to how the part that Bosch plays in the history of what's happening in the world right now, technologically wise?
Yeah, I mean, I think, thank you for that. I think you're giving us too much credit, but it was different TV. It was different from what you saw on TV. That was what was cool about it. And, the look and the quality, it was like a mini movie every episode. And so I think it helped establish what you could do in streaming if you had the support of a studio. It's not to say that Amazon, Netflix don't make bad shows. Some of their shows are not that good, but so it really comes down to individuals and who you get on your team and things like that. So a few minutes ago, you said, do I pinch myself? I pinch myself a lot about things that just happened that were luck, or I'm a believer in that Mark Twain thing that the harder you work, the luckier you get. But I have had a lot of luck, and I've worked hard, but still things had to happen. I mean, the whole look of Bosch is because we talked to a producer who had produced a lot of Michael Mann movies and was always traveling the world, never home that much. And he said, like, well, TV's getting to be good now, with HBO and Sopranos and so forth. I want to get into TV. And we got this guy, and he's like responsible for the look of the show. And it looks like a Michael Mann film.
Yeah.
And so that, what a lucky break. If we gotten somebody else, we might not be talking about 8 years of Bosch,
And now you've got a new series, a spin-off series that you announced the other day, the Bosch Legacy, which I believe the first season is adapting The Wrong Side of Goodbye. Is that correct?
Yeah. And we already filmed it. We just finished filming, and we're in post-production. So that'll be out, in the first, I don't have a date or anything, in the first half of the new year.
Now, obviously, with all the success, Michael, there's people out there, writers out there thinking, you probably show up every day and great words just flow. But to just kind of humanize your own situation, there must still be days where you sit down and write and you think, that's no good and it's in the bin. Does that happen often? Does it still happen?
Yeah, it happens. It's going to happen to everybody. But, it's, the longer you do something, the better you are at it. So I do think it happens less for me. I have a better sense of what I'm doing as I go into every day of writing. But also, I'm sure I talked about this. To me, everything happens after the first draft, in rewriting. Rewriting is everything. And so if I do have a bad day, I just keep soldiering on and get through that bad day because I know I'm going to come back to these words and these pages and this chapter at least 2 or 3 more times. And, all writers are their own harshest critic. And, if you have a rough patch, but you power through, when you come back around on a rewrite, you're going to recognize that rough patch right away. You're going to know this was when I had those bad days or whatever. And then you put extra emphasis on making it better. So I don't get all concerned. Excuse me. I don't get all concerned when I have a bad day. I just soldier through and know I'll be back to win the battle next time. Brilliant. I'm using all these war metaphors. It makes it sound like, it's just me in a room with my laptop. It's not that big a deal.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy.
We have some listener questions for you, Michael, if you're happy. And these are all about digging into the craft. And some of these cover stuff that we talked about last time, but I'm wondering if much has changed since we last spoke, particularly now you've worked on TV. But Christopher Wills says, now that your books have been filmed, do you write with that in mind? And how does that manifest in your writing? So are you thinking of TV shows, or are you able to focus just on the novel as a thing in itself?
Yeah, I don't really think it's funny. The TV show has influenced me in a great way, but not that way. I don't write thinking this will be great when they adapt it, or this will be a great movie or whatever. I just don't think that way. But I always thought visually anyway. So I think my books are visual, and that appeals to film and TV makers. But that's the way I've always written. But what's influenced me goes the other way. On the TV shows, the Bosch books, at least the first half of the Bosch books, were all Bosch POV, Bosch centric. You were in his head through every page. And then you get on a TV show and you can't do that. You have to spread the storytelling out, and build up lives of other characters. And consequently, on the show, some of the characters have these rich, deep past and full lives. And in my books, they're like thin as paper. And so we've improved the books in that regard. But it's also taught me, I don't know if it's taught was the wrong word. It's also influenced me in that I'm doing more books where narrations are shared, like Bosch and Ballard, right, and things like that. And I think that's a direct influence from the TV show.
Excellent stuff. Also, a question from Christopher. He says, it appears from my research that you don't plot a lot in advance. So before you start writing, what do you need to know about the story you are about to write?
So do you think that's an insult? It appears I don't plot my books.
Right.
I think he means plotting in advance, outlining in advance. So
yeah, no, I need the beginning and end. I need to I ruminate about stuff sometimes for years, and I have and I'm always thinking in terms of how a book it begins and where it leads to, and the middle part is what I don't plot out. But again, it could be a matter of semantics. My first drafts are they're really long and over wordy and need a lot of work. And so you could say that is a very over detailed outline. And then from that, I sculpt out the book in the second and third go-throughs. So, I know there's people that outline in great detail. There's people that don't outline. But at the end of the day, there's some kind of framework that you're attaching the story to. And, so when I say I don't outline and I see what happens in the middle, that could be a form of outlining.
We chuckle, Michael, because we once got some very wise advice from Ben Aronovich on this show when we discussed with him that we'd written a 50,000-word outline.
he said, "That's a book."
He says, "I write books shorter than that." But it's good to hear. It's good to hear.
And how reassuring for the listeners to hear that Michael Connelly's first drafts need a lot of work. That is just, that's so heartwarming to hear that. That's so relatable.
I mean, that connects with the prior question about, hard when you hit rough spots. That's the first draft. That's where you got to soldier through. And so sometimes those are pretty ugly scenes and ugly pages. But maybe because I've been doing it for 30 years, and my confidence has grown a lot since the beginning. I just know I can make that stuff better second or third time around. And it's interesting because books get shorter. Each I'm not adding. I mean, I add here and there, but overall, I'm subtracting. I really believe that less is more when it comes to editing. And so I usually write on about 110,000, then it gets down to about 105, and then it gets down to 98 or 100 when I turn it in.
Brilliant. Do you, having written so many books now, Michael, do you have a specific ritual or way of celebrating finishing a book?
Yeah, by starting the next one.
I thought you were going to say that. I really thought you were going to say that.
I don't have a ritual, but in a way, that's what happens because I don't know why this is, but somehow when I'm on the final days, I'm wrapping it up. And remember, I usually don't start anything till I know how it's going to end. So by the time I'm really wrapping it up, I start getting thoughts about what I'm going to do next. And so I usually don't take breaks between books. I usually take breaks between drafts of a book, So if I was going to take a vacation, it wouldn't be between books. It would be between the first and second draft of a book.
So you don't plan around the kids' holidays. You plan around when the book's finishing.
I used to have to try to deal with that, but I wrote on so many vacations. Now I had one kid, and she's up and out of the house now, older, and so now everything's planned around me.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that you celebrate by starting a new book because there is actually there's an excitement, isn't there? The idea of starting something new and the relentlessness of having to finish something you've been working on for so long. So I guess in a way that is a reward, a kind of a blank page where you can create something from scratch. Is that really where that comes from?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because you get so deep and, I usually do 3 drafts and you're so deep into it that it is like a breath of fresh air to be just writing something else. And so rather than write letters or catch up on stuff, I've always tried to get the next book going. And sometimes this actually happened this year. I finished The Dark Hours and started writing the next book right away. And I only wrote 2 chapters of it. And then I kind of slowed down and got involved in television stuff and so forth. And the velocity of writing on it slowed down a bit. I got into that 15 minutes a day thing.
Fantastic. We've got a couple of questions that are kind of similar, so I'll ask them both and then see what you think of this. So Robin Sartes asks, I would love to know how Michael keeps series characters fresh and exciting. And Ed Howard asks, he says, in terms of craft and recommendations for character development when writing a series or writing multiple books with the same protagonist, So, like we said, you've been at this 30 years now, 30 years of Bosch. How do you keep that fresh and exciting? And you know, how are you keeping coming up with new challenges for these characters?
I don't know. I think it's like an instinctive thing. There's no like procedure I do. But I do have that rule, which I've said a few times today, that a character can't be static, book to book. There's got to be something new. I mean, obviously it's the same person, same DNA. So you've already established things about this character in this book. So in the next book, you got to establish something new or something additional. I always think in terms of my books moving forward and backward at the same time. You move forward with the character through a case and what's going on in the present, but you're always trying to fill in something about their past. That's informing whatever's going on in the current story. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a hard thing to answer. It's an instinctive thing saying things have to change. We see a lot of people not a lot of people. There's a lot of writers that are really good, and then they stick with that what they've done that's really good and don't want to change it up because for fear that maybe people won't like it or something. I don't know. I hate speaking for other writers, but you can see some stuff in their work. And I just feel that to keep people going with you, traveling with you on these stories and this character, things should change. Now, like Renee Ballard, who's the protagonist of the new book, I've only been writing about her about 5 years, I think 4 books that she's in. And, when we first meet her 4 or 5 years ago, she's sleeping in a tent on the beach. And when you meet her in the dark hours, she has an apartment. She's looking for a dog. She's just a different person than she was when we first met her 5 years ago.
I guess as well, because you're setting it in real world, in real time, the world is giving you challenges that you might not have. I mean, if you said to your publisher, I'm going to put a pandemic into the background of a novel, they might have said, hang on, Michael, this isn't a science fiction novel. I guess that kind of helps.
Yeah, no, I mean, that you can call that my crutch, that I get away without being a creative genius by just taking from the real world. And it's true. I mean, again, I have a fancier way of saying that, and that is that, I'm a journalist at heart, so I want to report on what's going on in the world. But you could flip that and say you're just taking what's going on in the real world, to create your afflictions and obstacles on your character.
That's fascinating. With your journalistic background, Michael, I mean, if we always think about milestones and things that happen in our lives that we don't know what that will have, the knock-on effect will be. But do you look back at the journalism time of your life and think, if I hadn't have been a journalist, I may not have had this career as an author?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things that can really freak you out because I know that's the case. I know what I've accomplished or what I've got going is all founded in those years because I spent so much time in police stations and with real detectives and just kind of gaining an experience and a knowledge of how things work. Granted, this was long before they even used DNA and all that. So the world has changed and I've had to keep up with it. But the basic, all the DNA and procedure, all that's window dressing on character. And I think what I got was character from watching real people do this work. And I don't know if I would have gotten that if, I was a English lit teacher, or I took a different road. Every writer takes the road that they need to take. And I needed to take that road to be able to do what I'm doing now, to be sitting right here, right now.
Speaking of careers, I've got another listener question from Laura Shepherd. And Laura, I know, is a practicing lawyer in the UK. I think she's a barrister in the UK. So this is a nice technical question. She's asking about, the Mickey Haller books. How do you keep the tension and mystery in the story when a court case is at the end of the investigation, when all of the evidence has been gathered? So, in legal, every kind of all the cards are on the table there. How do you keep that tension going?
Well, I think there's built-in drama because it all that stuff, as she says, it all ends up in this box, the courtroom, the stage, and it's a place where character really prevails. And the trick with writing fiction about it is to hide evidence. In other words, have stuff not be known till it comes out in that room, in that box. And I try to be as accurate as I can, but the whole court system in almost every country is designed so that when you go into that box and you finally go to trial, not everyone knows everything. And so the challenge is to figure out how to hide something from the reader, or Haller hides from his opponent, that kind of thing. Or it comes out of what the action that's happening in the courtroom. And so it becomes a fresh new aha moment. But when it comes to the lawyer stuff, that is the big challenge. I mean, I think inherently the stakes are really high in a trial. There's a built-in tension, but you have to find ways of twisting it and making it even more full of tension by the actions of your characters.
Do you approach the storytelling in the Mickey Haller books different to the Ballard and Bosch books because of that legal procedure element to them?
Yeah. I mean, I have that. Often, like a Bosch or Ballard book will come to me, because of some kind of character thing I want to do. It's occurred to me it's time to do this with Ballard, put her in an apartment and make her vulnerable in a new way. With Haller, I have a good sense of that character. I think I got that character nailed down. But I'm usually, and I talk to a lot of defense attorneys, two in particular who were the models for Haller in the first place, are still practicing lawyers, and I still talk to them. And I often look for something that happens in that box. Like, tell me stories about when things went wrong, or when something surprised you in a courtroom. And I often build those stories from some kind of legal situation.
So very much using the journalistic kind of approach, and that you're still interviewing a lot of people and looking for where the threads and ideas. So that kind of really is carried on, isn't it, underneath?
Oh, yeah. I do that all the time. And, I guess it's classified as research, but most of these people I've known for years and years, and they're social friends. And, it's not just, I'm not there with a notebook like a reporter to say, tell me about this. I'm usually having drinks, or I'm having breakfast. There's socializing going on, and then I'll ask a few of my questions. But a lot of these people, you don't have to ask questions; they just tell you stories. And then, as I say, I'm not a creative genius, but I think I do have a genius for throwing out a net and getting all kinds of stuff. And then I'm the guy who goes through the net and decides, this guy, I throw this back into the water. This is an anecdote. This is a runner that could go maybe 50 pages, or this is the book that I could build a whole book around this idea. And that's the journalism. That's a procedure that's been with me since I was a journalist. And that's really how I work.
I love it. It's like you're actually a fisherman at heart, and that's the process in which you can pull out all of the best catches, so to speak. That's brilliant stuff.
I grew up in Florida, and I did a lot of fishing, and I was actually even proficient at throwing a net for a little while there. But you bring it up and you dump it on the deck, and you look through it and make sure some stuff is even poisonous or sharp. Some stuff is great bait. You kind of go through it, and you throw a lot overboard because it's not going to work for you. But you keep other stuff.
Excellent.
Metaphor of the year, folks. Metaphor of the year. I've got one last listener question from Lynn Clark. She says, I love the interaction between Bosch and Haller. Any more of those on the horizon?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't plan too far ahead. Like, I know what I'm writing next, and it's going to be another I guess the Dark Hours you could call a Ballard and Bosch because she's the protagonist. The next one's going to be a Bosch and Ballard because Bosch will be the lead. But yeah, no, my answer to those kind of questions is it really you're saying, are you done with any of these characters? And I'm not. So I can definitely see where Bosch and Haller will cross paths again some way.
Wonderful, wonderful stuff.
And Michael, with the success of the books and the number of books you've now written and the career that you've had, and again, reflecting on the 30 years, is there anything that you're still harboring to achieve within your career, something different or a different angle or some different technology that you're kind of looking at? Is there anything there?
Not really. I mean, the one thing I'm hoping to accomplish, I've had 2 movies made on my books, but I had nothing to do with them. And I got through unscathed. In fact, I think the Lincoln Lawyer movie is very good. I really loved it. And, but I was luck. I picked the right producer basically to sell it to, and he did a good job with it and got all these good people involved, including Matthew McConaughey. But again, I had nothing to do with it. I'm very much involved in the TV shows I'm involved in that are coming from my books. But so I guess what's left off of my list of things I want to write is a film. I like to write a film, and so in more recent years, as I've been comfortable and happy with what's going on in the TV world, I've been looking to do a film. And so I wrote a book a couple of years ago called Fair Warning, which is the reporter Jack McAvoy's series. And so I'm working on a script for that for a producer, and I'm hoping that possibly my final thing in Hollywood would be a film that I've written.
I love it. That's completely the reverse of Mark Stay here, who started doing films and then wanted to write a book. So that's kind of like, you're kind of crossing paths. It's brilliant.
I'll see Excellent you at the movies. Stuff. Fantastic. Wow. Okay. Shall we wrap things up then?
I think we will. Michael, I just want to say thank you so much for being with us again, 5 years on, and we promise we won't leave it another 5 until we speak to you again. But we also just wanted to, I think it's really important. We get to speak to some incredible authors on this show, and it's really important, I think, to take a moment just to kind of acknowledge the career that you've had so far. And not just, and obviously this is a writing podcast, I mean, the millions of readers who you've entertained for millions of hours, whether it's through your books and whether it's through the TV shows and the movies. But I also want to just acknowledge the millions, maybe thousands, definitely hundreds of thousands of writers that you've inspired, because we all know as writers that we read a book and we get inspired and want to write. So I just want to acknowledge and thank you on behalf of the writing community for all those unknowns out there that you won't probably never heard of writers that you've influenced, or maybe some people have read one of your books and they've written their first ever crime or thriller novel afterwards. So thank you for all of the dedication and work you've put in, and the value that's been felt by the writing community.
Oh, well, thanks for saying that. It's interesting that, I've been inspired over my career by people I've never met, just because I've been inspired by their words and their writing. And so I know how that can work. And so if my books have helped anyone, that's great. That's a great compliment. But what I like the most about what you said just now, you said my career so far. So I appreciate that. You think I still have some left, because I've been getting a lot of 30 years and elder statesman or OG. But yeah, I still feel like I have more to do, and maybe there'll be some more inspiration from that.
It's when they start giving you lifetime achievement awards, Michael. That's when you need to, just remind them there's plenty more gas in the tank.
I was supposed to get one this year, which I was, concerned about, but luckily the convention was canceled because of COVID, and so I haven't joined that class of career achievement wrap-ups.
Do you know what the beauty about being a writer, though, Michael, is retirement is a myth. There's no such thing as retirement. You can try and stop writing, but writing will never leave you. So we're certainly looking forward to all the extra books that are coming our way from your writing desk, Michael. So Absolutely brilliant. And best of luck, obviously, with The Dark Hours. It's out now, folks. If you want to get a copy of it, you know where to go. And Michael, just one last question for you. Is there one piece of advice? We asked you this last time. I'm curious. Any piece of advice that you've learned in the last 5 years you'd like to pass on to writers as something to keep people inspired if they're really struggling right now?
I kind of said it earlier, just keep your head down. I mean, that's my challenge now because I'm involved in a bunch of different things, from podcasts to TV shows to books, is to keep your head down and, write the story you want to write. Don't be buffeted by the winds of what other people are doing. Don't lick your finger and hold it up to the wind. Just keep your head down and write your story.
Fantastic advice. Folks, if you've been inspired by this episode, please spread the word. Tell your writer friends, tell your Michael Connelly fan friends, subscribe, rate and review to your podcatcher of choice. So you can, and I'll put a link in the show notes so you can check out our earlier episode with Michael as well. And you can find us on social media at Bestseller Experiment. Twitter and Instagram is at BestsellerXP. Michael, you crop up on, I follow you on Instagram, certainly. You're on social media quite a bit, aren't you?
Yeah, I have. I'm not that good at it, but I have Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Fantastic. We'll put links to those in the show notes too. But yes, The Dark Hours out now. And look, if this is the first time you've come across Michael Connelly, you've got 36 other books out that you are in for such a treat. A whole world of page-turning, thrilling fiction there, which you absolutely love. Michael, thank you so much for speaking to us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. So it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
A goodbye from Mark 2. Goodbye.
Goodbye.